in Bush. I've got him at gunpoint.
Okay, gunpoint, 132 in Bush, covers code 3.
Being sent.
Phoenix 2514, 1010.
When was the last time you've seen a cop car from the 70s? They just don't exist anymore, except if you're watching an older TV show or movie. I feel as if I don't even see Crown Vics anymore. At least in my county, it's nothing but Tahoes, Chargers, and Explorers. Some forces even have a Corvette or Hellcat. I thought it would be interesting to go back and remember, and I guess pay tribute to the older police cars well before my time. I will say that not only do I struggle with the 70s, but I'm not all that familiar with the equipment used in pursuit or cop cars, and I feel like most of you watching aren't either. At the end of the day, these cop cars are just beefier versions of their civilian counterparts. Be sure to watch until the end to have all of the background knowledge of each car so you can vote on what you think is best. There will be a poll in the community tab to place your vote. With that said, what were the best police cars of the 1970s?
Hey, Paul!
Before I dive in, it's important to clarify that the cars mentioned were kind of right before the oil crisis and when emissions really started to hit the automotive industry. I can't compare downsized Novas to full-size LTDs. In addition, the cop cars post-1974 were detuned like crazy, and again, comparing a weaker motor from one brand to a stronger motor from another brand is not that fair. So these years range mainly from 1970 to 1973. Not every ordinary car can handle being a cop car, and this will apply to every car on this list. They were all fit to carry out their duty, whether it was with high-speed car chases, carrying out pit maneuvers, having a large cargo capacity, or just simply being a strong enough car. And from factory, these cop cars were modified to help carry out these tasks. For the most part, all of the cars on this list had heavy-duty shocks, coil springs, and torsion bars, front and rear stabilizer bars, roll bars, bigger brakes, four-wheel disc brakes, stiffer body mounts, and a whole bunch more of just, you could say, performance-related modifications, but also needed refinement for law enforcement. I don't know who made what better when it comes to these additions. I'm not saying they are unimportant. However, what I think most people will make their vote by is what was under the hood, the transmissions that they had, if their great-grandpa or brother used a specific squad back then, and simply the looks of the car. In terms of the sirens, radios, wheels, light bars, and rotator beacons, that was all up to the manufacturer or the county. As these muscle cars were phasing out, certain spec cop cars were good alternatives for having that performance. People today and back then could go to a local auction and walk out with a retired Interceptor with these powerful engines that were put in muscle cars. Also, different forces at the time had different cars. I will be honest, this might have been the most difficult video that I've made so far, just because things varied from state to state, and finding information on these older cop cars with the bigger motors versus the ones that came with the most common or weaker motors was a little challenging. Lastly, the horsepower and torque ratings stated by the manufacturers weren't always correct. In many instances, the motors produced more horsepower, but I'm going by the factory ratings. We begin with the AMC Matador Enforcer. These were mainly used by the LAPD, Georgia, and Alabama. Other than that, every other county preferred different cars. That's not to say these were bad. Actually, the Matador name was quite successful in NASCAR, and as we will learn, they packed a punch. Under the hood was AMC's largest V8, a 401 good for 330 horsepower and 435 pound-feet of torque, 0 to 60 within 7 seconds. AMC didn't just slap in this motor and call it a day. There were tweaks made here and there to ensure that they wouldn't blow up at long duration high speed chases. Also, having the Matador at least from 72 to 74 with the 401 was only optional for the police. I know how all you love your Mopars, and in these was Chrysler's torque flight transmission, which is interesting. However, the LAPD believed that these, quote, outhandled and outperformed all the other cars. A former cop also said that these had far superior brakes compared to the Plymouths. Whether this is true or not, I don't know, but I think we can all agree that this is definitely an underrated cop car from the time. Every other police department thought the opposite, and so AMC backed out of the police car business in '76. Speaking of AMC, the Javelin was used specifically by the Alabama State Troopers. In 1971, the state of Alabama could not afford a full-time fleet of full-size Fords and Chevys, so they turned to AMC and received the first pony police car. At first they ordered 2, the guys liked it, and so they ordered 130 more. Basically, it was a base Javelin with the 4-barrel dual exhaust 401 mated into AMC's cast iron Borg-Warner transmission. To save on costs, ADPS opted out of the coil induction fiberglass hood and twin grip limited slip. Looking at it from the outside, the Amex badge was replaced with 401, there were a few graphics, and a vintage siren that couldn't be heard over the speed of 100 due to the sound of the engine sitting right on top. Come 1972, these received Chrysler's torque flight transmission, same as the Matador and the Ambassador. The top speed in these was rated at 130, but some state troopers reached 150. Of course, the tires would need to be replaced right after. The younger guys on the force loved them, while the older guys preferred the 4-doors, and they would be on the force for 4 years. Unfortunately, these didn't handle all too well, and they got a reputation for being easy to wreck due to their short wheelbase and low-profile tires. One state trooper stated these were, quote, almost too responsive. Apart from a few decals, radio, and that vintage siren, these were not much different from the public variants. I know I said earlier that all these cars receive special equipment, but these not so much. The Javelin won't be in the poll. I just found this story interesting and wanted to share it with you guys. By 1970, 85% of American cop cars were made by Chrysler. The most popular cars on a police force would go to the Coronet or Satellite and the Polara or Fury. The Dodge Polara Pursuit came with a 440 good for 375 horsepower and 380 torque in 1969. That same year, these Pursuit models held the top speed record for a 4-door factory-built sedan until 1994, when it was beaten by the Chevy Caprice with the LT1 engine. Come 1970, the 440 engine's compression ratio dropped to comply with new emission standards, and so power output was down to 370. 5 less horsepower is not a big deal, but come 1972, it was down to 285. Most forces did not opt for the 440, they might have had like 1 or 2, if that. There were 6 engine options to choose from at the time, and opting in for the biggest motor was expensive. The most common would be from the 318 or 360. To add, most forces chose that same torque flight transmission, however, there was the option of a 3-speed manual. Watching Blues Brothers or Smokey and the Bandit in 2024 might be hard for some, as many of these Dodges and Plymouths were destroyed on set, even though these had unibody construction and had more welded joints per foot compared to their civilian counterparts. I am by no means a muscle car expert, but I do know that these 440s are respected by so many. To have the same or similar motor as the Barracudas, Challengers, and Roadrunners from the time in a police car is crazy. Unfortunately, by 74, this motor was a shadow of what it once was. In 1971, they were still plenty powerful, and I think that Polara is going to be the winner of this week's poll. You know what they say, Mopar or no car.
Car's got a lot of pickup. It's got a cop motor, a 440 cubic inch plant. It's got cop tires, cop suspension, cop shocks. It's a model made before catalytic converters, so it'll run good on regular gas.
Like I said earlier, Chrysler was way ahead of the others, so pulling information on Ford and Chevy was a bit difficult. Ford was the first to offer a police package in the 50s, and before the 70s, they were popular. In the movie Dirty Harry, Eastwood drives around in a 68 Custom 500. This is a 70s video, and in this weird time period before the downsizing took full swing, Ford was not picked. I came across a few sources that claimed that Ford police cars at the time had bad brakes, thus the cops did not want to use them. Sometimes things like this can be subjective. For those of you around during the time, what are your thoughts? Ford had the LTD, Galaxy, and Custom 500. I believe all 3 of these were Ford's full-size sedans, and from 1970 to 73, they were all pretty similar. Come 1975, Ford merged them all together. The 1971 Galaxy 500 429 Police Interceptor, had a 429, good for 375 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque, made it into Ford Select Shift Automatic. The compression ratio was 11:1, making it slightly stronger than the 429 Cobra jet engine. I'm not saying the Ford sucked, they were very competitive because of the 429's sizable bearings and semi-HEMA combustion chamber. Some sources say these motors in 71 were pushing closer to 450 horsepower. Last, but certainly not least, is GM's police cars. Like the rest, they had a few options: Suburbans, Biscaynes, Bel Airs, and even Townsman wagons. Of the four, the Bel Air and the Biscayne were the most popular before '73 when the Biscayne name was dropped altogether. The 1971 Bel Air with the police package had the option of having the 454, made it into GM's 3-speed turbo hydromatic transmission. Power output was rated at 365 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque, making it on par with the rest of the competition. After 1971, these motors were drastically detuned and made 245 horsepower. By 1975, the spiral continued downhill and the LS4s made 215. These Bel Airs were pretty solid. They had hydraulic valve lifters, 4-barrel carburetor, high-performance camshaft, and a dual exhaust system, along with a whole bunch of other upgrades like the others. The early 70s was not exactly a spot for GM's police cars. However, come 1975, with the introduction of the Nova and Impala 9C1, they became one of the most popular cars used by law enforcement. And there you have it, some of the best cop cars of the early 70s. Again, the poll is in the community tab for you all to vote on your pick. I'm very excited to see who wins. Last week's poll was head to head with 2 cars, but the rest were left in the dust. I'm curious to see how this one plays out. That is going to wrap it up for this week's video. I do sure hope you enjoyed it. Again, this was probably one of the most difficult videos I made. I sure hope the information I provided is, for the most part, pretty true. If not, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. With that said, I will see you guys all next week.